Chapter 46 Text Message. As the rain poured down on the dark, fateful night, a young boy of 12 with gray eyes stood silently outside the kitchen, his ears perked up as he listened to the raised voices of his parents. He had come down to have some water in the kitchen when he stumbled upon this scene he was witnessing at this moment. He had always believed that his parents were a loving couple, but the argument he was witnessing at that moment made him question everything he thought he knew. Neil's heart raced as he heard his mother's usual soft and loving voice, sharp with anguish now, cut through the sound of raindrops hitting the windowpane. "Noah, I have lived with the fact that I will never be the woman you love, even when we got married. But how can you do this to me now?" The thunder rumbled in the distance, adding an ominous tone to the scene in the kitchen. Neil's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the words he was hearing from his parents. What was going on with his loving parents? He tensed up in the kitchen corner as he looked at his father's distressed face. His father retorted, "Catherine, you need to understand that even though I used to love Ella, she holds no place in my heart now. But she needs my help. I can't just overlook the fact that she's being mistreated by that bastard of a husband. I need to help her and her child from his clutches." Neil's gray eyes widened as he struggled to understand what was going on between his parents. He couldn't understand why Ella, a woman living in one of the neighboring estates, was being brought into their argument. But it became clear to him that she was the cause of their first ever fight. And at that moment, he realized his parents' love for each other was not as simple as he had once believed. As days passed by, Neil had watched as his father's anger and determination to save Ella from her abusive husband grew, and his determined actions only made his poor mother depressed. He would frequently stumble upon their arguments, but they would quickly put on smiles, as if nothing was wrong, whenever they noticed him. Unfortunately, his father's determination to save Ella and her child from her abusive husband had only caused his parents' death in the end. This was because the abusive husband was affiliated with the dangerous Da Kroll group, and his father's interference in their lives, due to his love for Ella, resulted in the downfall of his family. And on that day he watched the man pull the trigger against his father's head. Neil's heart was consumed by the belief that love was a downfall of a man, a trap that could lead to ruin and heartache. Before this Ella came into their life, Neil had looked up to his father and wanted to be like him when he grew up. And despite his father's success in life, he had brought their family's downfall in a night. Even though his father had died trying to be a hero to his ex-lover, Neil didn't hate him. The person he hated and would never forgive was the man who killed his parents and the woman who brought such misfortune to their peaceful life. And he had sworn with everything in him that he would never be like his father. He would never be a fool in love and let it cause his downfall. He will bring justice to his parents' death, and if he ever laid eyes on that woman, Ella, ever again, she would regret ever being alive while his own parents were under the earth now. Neil's fingers tightened around the burning cigarette between his fingers. He crushed the cigarette in his palm and then flung it into the trash can. He had used different methods to search for this Ella, but it was like she had vanished from the face of the earth. And he hoped she better be dead wherever she is now, because if she were to be alive, he would make sure to give her a terrible death along with her husband. Neil's expression darkened dangerously as those thoughts flicked through his mind. He stood rigidly before the floor-to-ceiling glass window in his room and stared blankly at the night skyline of Zen City. He hadn't been able to control his rage earlier when Liam was trying to convince him about love. He had snapped out in rage and slammed his door on his friend's face. He just couldn't stand the idea of himself being like his father. Love was a weakness he would never welcome into his life. He was stronger and more capable being on his own, and he wouldn't stand some woman coming into his life and ruining it for him. Never. As Neil was staring out into the night, his phone on the nightstand beeped, drawing his attention away from the window. Annoyed, he glared at the device, wondering who would message him at such a late hour. Then it occurred to him that it might be Liam. Regret washed over him for sending Liam away from his condo an hour ago in a fit of anger. There was so much he needed to discuss with Liam about the man who had shot him, but he hadn't gotten to talk about that before sending him away. With a sigh, Neil reluctantly made his way back to his phone. However, as he unlocked the screen, he noticed that the sender's name was not Liam's, but a number saved as Little M.I. It dawned on him that it was Mia's number, which he had taken before leaving her apartment building in the evening. Her message was simple. "Did you arrive home safely? And how is your wound?" Neil frowned upon reading these questions. Why was she asking such pointless things? Of course he had made it home. No one had ever messaged him to check on his safe arrival, and now that he received such a message, he couldn't help but find it foolish. To most, it might seem like a caring question, but for Neil, who had never experienced such concern in years, it set off alarms in his mind. Why would anyone even inquire about him reaching home safely unless they planned to assassinate him on the way? It seemed absurd to ask if he had arrived home safely. Did she think he would be assassinated on the way? Neil scoffed internally. People really like to ask unnecessary questions, and he wasn't the right person to reply to such pointless questions that would lead to small talks. Just as he planned to throw the phone back on the bed and ignore the message, the phone beeped again. Have you gotten to see a doctor to check your wound for any signs of infection? I hope you've eaten as well? Neil scowled at her message again. Why was she really asking him questions about himself? He normally didn't talk about anything personal but business-related matters with people, and even his only remaining relative, his uncle, would never probe him about trivial things like whether he had eaten or not. So why was she asking him that? Neil thought to himself while glaring down at the message as if to see through the sender. And after a few minutes of contemplation, he replied with a simple yes, though he hadn't really eaten after the meal he'd had in her room, but he didn't care. He wasn't used to eating in the late hours of the night, and he wasn't ready to change any of those habits because Davina instructed. Neil thought as he stared down at the screen, as if waiting for her to reply to his simple yes, but she didn't. And after a few moments of silently staring at his screen, he remembered why he'd taken her number in the first place and found himself typing another message. Back in Whispering Way, Mia lay curled up on her bed with her phone in hand and her cat sleeping beside her head. She stared down at her phone screen. What could she possibly reply to a simple yes? She had been worried ever since Mr. Ice Cube had left their apartment building, and because she hadn't been able to see him off to his friend, she had felt bad and strangely restless. After eating supper with her mother and Owen, she had come straight back to her room. And seeing the expensive guitar peeking from the corner of her bed, Mia had felt the urge to return it to him. She didn't want to be indebted to him for this, and she didn't want to keep it because people would suspect and accuse her of how she got to possess such an expensive thing if they were to see her with it. Moreover, she couldn't bring herself to sell it, as it felt ethically wrong considering it was given to her and she liked it. Although she desperately needed money, selling it was not an option. She couldn't insist that he take it back either, as Mr. Ice Cube had made it clear that if she refused to keep it, it would result in the guitar being destroyed. With how serious he looked when he told her to keep it, if she dared return it to him on Monday, he would certainly break it. And how could she stand such a beautiful thing being destroyed? Thus, she would better keep it and find a way to pay him back for it someday so she wouldn't feel indebted to him for anything. However, by keeping it, she would be left with having to only play it inside her room because she mustn't allow even Owen to see it. After making that decision, Mia had also picked up her phone and messaged him to know how he was doing and if he'd seen a doctor. And the reason she asked if he'd eaten was because she noticed he was the kind to neglect food, with how much his stomach had been growling repeatedly when he was asleep in her room. Upon receiving a simple yes in response now, she found herself at a loss for words. Deciding to go to sleep now that she knew he had returned home safely and sought medical attention, she was interrupted by a beep from her phone, drawing her attention back to the phone once again. Why are you still awake by this time of the night? She read his message with a faint smile playing on her lips. She checked the time and noticed it was indeed late. It was 2:45 a.m. in the morning. She hadn't been able to sleep because his scent still lingered on her bed and every place she turned to. His scent was akin to a warm spring breeze, carried with a delicate hint of woody fragrance infused with the richness of rare orchid blossoms. It was an expensive scent that could drive someone crazy, and just by laying on the bed he had been laying on the whole day, made her own body scent like his. Mia smiled as she responded to his message and posed the same question. I couldn't sleep. What about you? It took a few minutes before he replied once more. You couldn't sleep? Or are you anticipating another intruder to enter through your window at night? Get up and close your window. Mia's expression turned into a frown as she read his message. Even though she couldn't see his face or hear his voice, she could sense the commanding tone in his final sentence. How did he even know that her window was open? Mia wondered as she got out of bed and gently shut the window, making sure to glance downwards to ensure there was no one spying on her. How did you know my window was open? She typed and sent the message to him. She lay back on the bed, pulling the blanket up to her chest as she waited for his response. Fortunately, she didn't have to wait long, as he replied within seconds. "It's obvious you're a careless person," he replied without any further explanation on how he came to a conclusion of her being a careless person. And before Mia could type her own retort, another message came in. "After your classes on Monday, you will meet me in my office. Now drop your phone and go to sleep." Mia stared at her phone screen with a deep frown. Why the hell does he always have to command me instead of talking politely? Even though it's just a message, I could sense his authoritative tone even from the message. She mumbled to herself and sent another message to him. "Meet you in your office? Did I do something wrong?" she asked, but unfortunately he didn't reply again. Even after 10 minutes, his reply didn't come. Thus Mia sighed and put her phone away and lay properly on the bed. Why would he want her to come to his office on Monday? Chapter 47 Ruin her image. Mia's consistently ringing phone woke her up on Monday morning, but before she could pick up the call, it stopped ringing. When she looked at her phone, she noticed she'd missed several calls from Rain. However, before she could decide to call her back, she noticed the time and realized she was late for school. Shoot! She jumped out of bed and grabbed her towel. She took a quick morning shower and hurried to dress up. Due to the hot weather, and because she had seen an announcement post on their school forum that there would be a final photo shoot for all the participants of the school event in the afternoon, she decided to wear a light pink sleeveless dress that stopped an inch above her knees, with white polka dots on the fabric. She didn't want to wear her usual t-shirt and jeans to school because she really hoped to be part of the final participants of the contest, not for any reason, but because she wanted to pay off the bank loan with the prize. To feel more comfortable in the sleeveless dress, Mia added a denim jacket for a casual and comfortable vibe. Although she didn't like wearing sleeveless clothes and decided to wear the jacket, she planned to take off the jacket for the photo shoot at school. Completing her outfit with black ankle boots, she quickly grabbed her bag and phone before leaving the apartment. She arrived at school a few minutes before the first class began, and as usual, Rain had saved a seat for her. However, for some reason, she sensed that all the students were watching her every move, like some local CCTV camera. She had noticed a lot of students' eyes even when she first entered the school grounds, but she dismissed it as nothing. Now that she was aware of it, she found it odd because their eyes seemed to be filled with either disgust or pity. She would have assumed it was due to her change in style, but that wasn't the case, because none of them seemed to even notice her dress. Sitting down next to Rain, she leaned over and whispered, "Why do I feel like everyone is staring at me today? As far as I know, there's no longer any scandal about me." She asked cautiously, feeling self-conscious about herself and her new look due to the constant gaze. Rain also leaned over to whisper, "Didn't you see the post on our school forum last night and on the school newspapers? I called you this morning to warn you about it, but you didn't pick up my calls." Mia frowned deeply. "What post? The only one I saw last night was the announcement post about the photo shoot. I didn't see any other trending post," she said as she fished out her phone from her bag to log into the forum since the professor hadn't arrived yet. The moment Mia logged into the forum, her eyes widened at the trending post at the top. How did she miss this last night? And who would dare post such a thing about her? The post was about Mia and the town she lived in. It even had her photos, taken on Whispering Way Street as she was crossing the street with a few little kids. It seemed to be taken yesterday afternoon, on Sunday, when she was coming back from running some errands for her mother. However, that wasn't what made Mia angry. The photos in the post were heavily edited to make her look dirty and make the place she lived in look like trash. If she didn't live in the town, she would have also believed the edited version of Whispering Way. The caption of the post read, "Trash like this don't belong among us in Ivy Grove Institute." Mia clicked on the comments section, and the comments she saw made her regret entering it. Ew, how could someone live in a place like that? Look how they move around trash. She will spread unknown diseases from her trashy town into our clean society if she isn't dismissed of her scholarship. I can't believe I've been staying in the same class with a dirty person like this. Yes, I agree with you guys. She doesn't belong with us. Imagine she has some disease and we got infected. That wouldn't be nice. I even sat close to her in our project class. That was so gross. Mia's fingers tightened around her phone as she continued to scroll the comments section. Someone in the comments section even went as far as to say, "Oh my goodness. No wonder I came back home with some red, itchy bumps on my skin after sitting next to her in the news reporting class a few days ago. She's trash from the slums. You guys should go easy on her. It's not her fault that she's that poor. Instead of insulting her, how about we come together and help her? I have a few clothes and jewelry I don't wear anymore. If you have anything you want to give away, we can give them to her in school. Mia decided to stop scrolling because the more she read the comments, the more she felt her blood boil in her veins. Who would dare post such a thing about her in public? Her family might have been poor, but she wasn't as poor as they all made it seem. Her town might not be fancy, but it wasn't as dirty as they all made it seem. They made her look like a beggar and a trashy person. Mia felt tears of anger well up in her eyes as she glared unblinkingly at her phone. Even though she wasn't looking up, she could feel the judging eyes of her classmates and could hear the hushed whispers in the background. I can't believe she even had the guts to come to school wearing a beautiful dress when she lives in a place like that, said one of the students from behind. Yes, I hope she's not planning to be among those participants of the contest by wearing a dress. She better not, because she would only be spreading her germs and nothing else. She's not even beautiful enough to be among them. As Mia heard their words, she tried to fight back her tears of anger and embarrassment, but they rolled down her eyes. Unable to take it anymore, she decided to leave the class. Mia, Rain called as she watched Mia pick up her bag and run out of the class without turning back. Rain also stood up and picked up her bag, but before she went after her friend, she turned to her classmates. Her voice was laced with disdain as she said, "I'm genuinely disappointed in the narrow perspective some of you are displaying. And it's disheartening to witness such narrow-mindedness in people. Wealth doesn't make someone superior, and poverty doesn't make someone inferior." Mia's character and determination shine brighter than any stereotype. So, before you judge, take a moment to appreciate the strength it takes to rise above circumstances. Done speaking, Rain turned her back and left the class to look for her friend. However, Rain searched almost everywhere she knew Mia would be, but she wasn't there. She wasn't even at the rooftop where she always went to clear her mind, nor was she in the library. Though, even Rain had seen where Mia lived, it was nothing like how it was in the photos, and whoever posted such photos did it to ruin her image in school. And to make matters worse, the photos were published in the school newspapers as well. Not just the journalism faculty would see them, but the entire school. It was only natural that Mia would want to hide in embarrassment, because Rain couldn't even imagine what she would do if she was the one being pictured as dirty trash. And whoever posted that had better not allow her to catch them, because she would skin them alive. Where could Mia be? As Rain was searching for her friend in the school, the latter was in the school cafeteria eating calmly, as she hadn't eaten breakfast when she left home. Mia didn't hide from all the judging eyes boring holes into her back in the cafeteria. She continued to quietly eat without paying any attention to anyone. Since they believed she was a trashy person, then they should continue to believe. She wasn't going to hide in shame, nor would she cry her eyes out in a corner for being born poor. Since the school cafeteria wasn't just for students, there were a few professors in the building eating as well. And as Mia continued to ignore all the whispers and stares, in the far corner of the cafeteria, someone was casually sitting down, sipping coffee while reading the school newspapers about Mia. Mia continued to eat her food until she was interrupted by the approaching sounds of clicking heels on the marble floor. When the sound stopped beside her table, Mia stopped eating and raised her head, only to see the last person she wanted to see standing there with an air of arrogance and smugness. It was Diane, standing in her beautiful light blue spaghetti strap dress with a ruffled hem that stopped at her mid-thighs, with a fitted bodice that pushed up her bosom. Her blonde hair was tied up in a ponytail. As usual, her two lackeys were standing with her as they all looked down at Mia with arrogance dancing in their eyes. "How has your day been today, Mia? I hope you like the sudden fame you're receiving in school," Diane remarked smugly. Chapter 48. Quietly watching the scene. "How has your day been today, Mia? I hope you like the sudden fame you're receiving in school," Diane remarked smugly. As Mia heard Diane's words, she didn't have to think twice before she immediately realized that the person behind the viral post in school was none other than Diane Foster. Now that she thought about it, she recalled Diane's words on Friday, "You may think you're clever, but it won't last. Sure, you may have voters for the contest, and the praises of my heartthrob, but you will always be a nobody. And rest assured, I will put you in your rightful place soon enough. Remember my words, your time in this school won't be long." She had warned her in the library, but Mia hadn't taken her words seriously, as she thought the girl was all bark and no bite. But it seemed she really sent someone to spy on her and found out where she lived, and then posted those edited pictures in the school forum where she knew the journalism students fishing for stories would pick it up and publish it in the school newspapers for everyone to see. As this realization dawned on Mia, she clenched her fists tightly on the table and stood up to face Diane, who still had her smug expression on while she sipped from the creamy strawberry milkshake in her hand. "I hope you're now satisfied with the results of your scheme, Miss Foster?" Mia said calmly, trying her best to hold her anger in check and not hit that smug smile from Diane's face. The girl was too spoiled to the point she had no regard for any human lower than her class, and Mia couldn't help but wonder what she had done wrong in life to be a target for a spoiled young brat. "What are you trying to insinuate, trash?" Diane smirked arrogantly. "You shouldn't accuse me of exposing your dirty ways of living to the school, because I'm not the only one who dislikes you in Ivy Grove. You are just a girl from the slums who doesn't belong here. It's best you go back to your trashy town," she said while sizing up Mia. Diane had already promised to make Mia's life a living hell in school and also place her in her rightful place. And after she had said those words to Mia on Friday, she had taken action. She'd searched for an investigator and paid a huge amount so they could track down Mia's town and also dig into her past. Diane had paid to dig into her past because she wanted to know what happened to her high school bully. She could never forget how Mia had made her life a living hell in high school. Years ago, Mia had pretended to be her friend just so she could ruin her in school. She made the whole school believe that Diane was a girl who wets her bed at night. One day in the school cafeteria, Mia had purposely poured water on Diane's seat and made her sit on it, and when she stood up, Mia had pointed to her wet skirt, laughing out loud that Diane had peed her pants. She didn't just bully Diane, but she also stole her high school boyfriend. And now, Diane wasn't going to forgive such a thing. Even though her investigator couldn't dig into Mia's past to find out what had happened to make her family this poor and filthy, Diane wasn't going to back down. She would make sure she ruined Mia until she could no longer show her face in public again. Diane's hands balled up into clenched fists upon remembering how much Mia's bullying in the past had affected her mental health. Recalling all that, she glared at Mia with hatred. "You should quit acting all innocent and pure, Mia. You are the most devious person I've ever come across in my life," she said while she took 2 steps forward, stepping into Mia's personal space before she whispered, "You can quit acting like you don't remember me, because your pretentious act only makes me want to show the school the real you. I will ruin you for what you did to me." Mia took a step back from Diane. She rolled her eyes. She couldn't believe that Diane was still going on about this high school thing. Mia thought in frustration. She didn't know if this Diane was starting to go crazy or something, because Mia was 100% sure she still recalled all her days in high school, and not once had she come across Diane or bullied anyone. Furthermore, what would someone like Diane be doing in a local high school in Whispering Way? Unless the girl was just cooking up excuses to ruin her image in school. Mia sighed. There was no point in really confronting Diane for spying on her because it seemed the girl was sick in the head. Mia decided to just leave the cafeteria. She had lost her appetite anyway. Picking up her bag, she began to walk away from the girls. However, it seemed that Diane wasn't done with her drama yet. One of her lackeys, Sally, purposely bumped into Mia. With a fake cry of pain, Sally fell backward and the milkshake in her hand spilled on her dress and face. Meanwhile, Mia stared in astonishment at how the girl made it appear as though she had intentionally pushed her to the ground, when in reality it was Sally who had bumped into her and also fallen down by herself. "Ah, my ankle." Sally let out a cry as she forced out tears. "Why did you push me, Mia?" she cried out while grabbing her ankle with one hand and trying to wipe off the milkshake on her face with the other hand. Because of how loudly she was crying, the few people in the cafeteria who hadn't yet gone to their classes, or were skipping classes, started to gather around them to see what was happening. Mia stared down at the crying girl in stunned disbelief. She hadn't even touched her, but the girl was crying so hard as if Mia had killed her parents, and those tears. This girl should have been an actress instead of a journalist. "Why did you push her, Mia?" Diane rushed forward and glared at Mia in accusation while making sure she played the victim to the onlookers. "We were just trying to support you and help you raise some money so you could at least move to a better home. You should have just told us you don't need our help instead of being mean to the point of pushing Sally so hard," she accused with a pitiful expression. As the people heard what Diane said, they immediately believed her as everything looked convincing enough to point at Mia as the guilty one, and to make her seem like an ungrateful bitch who pushed away an innocent girl who was just trying to help her. Thus, the crowd began to murmur amongst themselves while glaring at Mia, who still looked too stunned to move. She's not just only poor, but also rude. When I saw the school newspapers, I even felt pity for her this morning, but look what she did to Sally, who tried to help her. I don't really like this Mia girl now. I had even voted for her before, but thank goodness the votes are withdrawable, because I have withdrawn my vote for her earlier. A dirty girl like her doesn't deserve to be our school queen. As Diane heard the whispers going around in the crowd, she muffled a satisfied grin as she had finally hit the target. However, she wasn't fully satisfied yet. Thus, she moved away from Sally and faced Mia. Sally is willing to forgive what you did to her if you'd apologize for pushing her, right, Sally? She turned to ask her friend, who also nodded and pitifully said, yes. I know she must have been ashamed of the news about her lifestyle, so it's understandable that she would react by pushing me when I offered to help her. I hold no grudge as long as she'll apologize. Mia couldn't believe she was witnessing a live drama, just like the ones in those drama series she used to watch, but in this one, she was the one being painted as the bully and the poor girl. She couldn't help but commend how good they were playing the drama and making her seem like the bad guy. Diane was a natural at acting, and if they were doing all these for her to stoop so low and apologize for something she hadn't done, then they could keep on dreaming because she wasn't going to apologize. I did not push Sally. She fell down on her own and emptied the milkshake jar on herself. Mia explained blankly as she looked at the crowd who were looking at her with disgust and hate, as if she had killed their entire family members. One of the girls in the crowd sneered, "You are a liar. I was sitting on the table next to yours and I saw you push her. It's best if you just apologize since Sally is willing to forgive you if you apologize. Yes, you should stop being arrogant and all mean when you don't even come from a good background. You have no idea what will happen to you if Sally were to report you to the dean. So, come down from your high horse and offer an apology." Another girl shouted from the crowd. Mia instinctively hugged her midriff, attempting to control her anger. She felt an overwhelming urge to find something to rearrange, just to avoid striking someone. While she may not come from a privileged family, she still had her pride. Regardless of what others may say, she was not going to apologize for something she didn't do. "I will not apologize." She clenched her teeth in frustration, glaring at the people surrounding her. Diane smirked. "Fine. If you refuse to apologize, then don't blame me for this." With that, she grabbed her own creamy milkshake from the table. Before Mia could react, Diane turned the jar upside down, drenching Mia's head with its contents and throwing the glass jar at her face. The jar struck Mia's forehead with force, nearly causing her to lose her balance. However, she regained control and grabbed her throbbing forehead. As Mia held her forehead in her hands, she felt another cold liquid pour over her body, rolling down her collarbone and seeping into her dress. Before she could regain herself from the shock, she felt several liquids being poured at her from different angles. "Ungrateful bitch. You don't belong here. Go back to your dirty, trashy home." Meanwhile, as the crowd reveled in the scene of how Mia was being drenched with juice and coffee by Diane's bootlickers in the cafeteria, they were completely unaware of the man in the far corner of the cafeteria, who had been quietly sipping his coffee while he watched the scene unfold. However, his gray eyes gradually grew ominously dark as he noticed how nobody was stepping in for Mia. Chapter 49. How did he get here? Few minutes ago, because Neil had been warned to start eating traditional meals properly, he had come earlier to the university so he could eat his breakfast in the cafeteria instead of going to some five-star restaurant and then driving back to the university again. When he walked into the cafeteria, all heads turned in his direction. He was already accustomed to people staring at him in awe wherever he went, thus he walked steadily towards the corner table beside the window where he could sit with no professors or students coming to disturb his morning by annoying him with just their mere chatter and small talk. Ever since he'd come to Ivy Grove Institute, his overwhelming aura and charisma were enough to make the rest of the professors stay away from him. He wasn't the kind to handle small talk, and he made himself clear with his curt replies and unwelcoming expression. And they all seemed to get the memo and steered clear of him. Neil casually removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie, making himself comfortable in the chair. His wounded side wasn't as uncomfortable as it was before, and it didn't stop him from doing his daily tasks. Since he wasn't accustomed to having breakfast, he only ordered egg toast, bacon, and coffee. While he was eating, A student approached him and placed the school newspaper on his table, giggling stupidly when he glanced up to meet her eyes. He would have disregarded the newspaper if it weren't for the headlines that caught his attention. Neil furrowed his brow as he realized the headlines were about Mia Harrison and the town she resided in. However, he refrained from touching the newspaper until he finished eating. He wiped his hands with a napkin and picked up the paper. His naturally well-shaped, thick eyebrows raised as he noticed how the photos on the newspaper looked heavily edited. What a joke, Neil thought with dry amusement. It seemed these nosy journalism students would never fail to surprise him with how they made things up just to get attention. If he hadn't been to Whispering Way before, he would have definitely believed this crap in the papers. Neil's expression twitched slightly as he continued to read the crap in the newspaper, and he couldn't help but notice that the person who published this seemed to be targeting Mia, because they made sure to make her look like someone who barely even knew what a bath was. The person also suggested that someone like her shouldn't be studying in Ivy Grove Institute before she spread some unknown disease to the students in the school. Who the fuck published this crap? Neil mumbled to himself in annoyance. He didn't know why he was feeling annoyed while reading the newspaper, but one thing he was certain of was that he hated it when these brainless journalists published lies about people just to get attention. He had once been on the receiving end when they published lies about his personal life. He hated it then, and he still hated it now. He knew everything said in the papers about Mia were all lies because he had spent a night in the Harrisons' apartment, so he knew what Mia's lifestyle was like. They might not be rich, but they were clean and simple. Neil dropped the newspaper and sipped from his coffee. However, as he was about to set down his coffee cup, he noticed the girl walking into the cafeteria. Even from where he was sitting, he could see that she was upset. Her large brown eyes appeared dark, and her plump cheeks and little nose looked so flushed that he could see the color from a distance. Not to mention her childhood habit of hugging her midriff to control her emotions. He didn't resume reading the newspaper and instead watched as she walked to the counter and ordered her food. Then, without paying any attention to the judging eyes of the students, she took her seat at the front row table and began to eat. Neil couldn't help his amusement at the fact that she didn't hide away in a corner like most girls would in such a situation. She even took the front table and ate calmly, even with the judging eyes. How interesting, he thought to himself as he sipped his coffee again. And as he watched her from where he sat, he couldn't help but think that she was as headstrong as she was when she was a little girl. In the past, she would slip away from her nanny and sneak out of their residence just to come and meet him at home. He also remembered a time when she once sneaked into a house filled with dogs just to get him another dog to replace his dead one. She wasn't intimidated by their sizes and went ahead to carry a pup from its mother, and if the caretaker of the residence hadn't arrived on time, she would have been torn apart by the dogs. Remembering that now, Neil's usually tight lips slightly pulled up. She hadn't changed, she had done the same even now that she'd grown into a woman. She risked her life to obtain confidential information from a house filled with large dogs, and she had also endangered herself to pursue criminals for her assignments. The more he saw this older version of the little girl he once knew, the more he wanted to unveil the mystery behind her. Something about her just didn't seem right. Nonetheless, he couldn't help but wonder which of the brainless journalism students spied on her and published such crap in the school newspapers. Well, whoever that may be, it wasn't his business. As long as he was still Leo Bennett, he mustn't interfere with any of the students' affairs and focus on his mission. He only had 2 weeks to finish up his work in Ivy Grove and return to being his soldier self, going back to the camp to make Jason's life a living hell until he'd gotten his full satisfaction for what the bastard said to him on the day of their meeting on Friday. Neil had told Mia to meet him after her classes today because he had some things to discuss with her about her information on Doc Kroll. But right now, he would prefer to act like he hadn't read the newspaper and it hadn't annoyed the shit out of him, before he'd end up breaking another student's arm like he did to that brat, Alaric. Neil thought to himself and resumed sipping his coffee. But then, as he was about to get up from his seat to go back to his office, he heard a small commotion from the front row tables. Looking up, he noticed Beauty with no brains along with her other friends standing in front of little Mia. Seeing that, Neil sat back down on the chair, crossed his right leg over his left leg, and leaned back against the chair. He tapped his long fingers against his thigh as he watched the girls with a blank face. He should get up and return to his boring office, but he found himself unable to leave, keeping a keen eye on the girls who he already knew were here to look for trouble. Under his keen observation, he noticed how one of the girls purposely bumped into Mia, making it seem like she had pushed her to the floor. At first, Neil watched with no expression or reaction, but when he heard Diane, who he thought still needed some good home training, ask Mia to apologize to the girl on the ground, he frowned deeply. If Mia dared to apologize to that girl, he would be really disappointed in her. To his delight, she didn't apologize and stood her ground. Good, Neil thought with a faint smirk on his stone-cold face. He liked it when people stood their ground. However, as the other students began to call her names and insult her, Neil felt his fingers clench into a tight ball. He didn't like this at all, and the fact that none of them were supporting her made his blood strangely boil in anger. To avoid interfering, Neil decided to just leave. Nonetheless, the next thing that happened immobilized him in place. When the milkshake glass jar hit against Mia's forehead, a vein throbbed in Neil's forehead. He tried to scold himself into simply walking away and pretending like he didn't see what was happening. However, as he saw the others begin to pour their drinks on her body, and Diane was about to throw another glass jar at her, he lost his temper. Before he could tell himself all the reasons he should ignore the students, he had already walked towards the girls in a few long strides and grabbed Diane's wrist before she could throw the jar. "Have you completely lost your mind, Miss Foster?" Neil gritted his teeth as he tightened his hold around Diane's slender wrist. His gray eyes looked dangerously dark as he glared down at the girl before him in utter annoyance. If looks could kill, Diane would have fallen dead and been buried immediately with how he was glaring at her. All the students gathered around the scene went silent and still in disbelief. The silence was so loud that if a feather were to fall, it would make a noise. The temperature suddenly dropped, and everyone felt the chilliness emitting from the man. However, Diane, whose wrist was being crushed in his grip, slightly winced in pain. She quickly schooled her expression and put on a pitiful look. Despite the noticeable anger in his eyes that looked like it would slice her into pieces, she still had the guts to speak because she believed no man was immune to her charm, including all the professors in Ivy Grove. Even though this man had once walked away from her in the restaurant, she believed he wouldn't deny her charm. "Mr. Bennett, thank goodness you are here. Look what Miss Harrison did to Sally because we were just trying to help her from the life she's living," she said pitifully while trying to play the victim. Neil didn't even glance at the other girl on the ground. His grip only tightened around Diane's wrist, and as if he was afraid of what he would do to her hand if he continued holding it, he abruptly released her and shoved her away from him. Diane almost lost her balance and stumbled against the person behind her, but she quickly found her footing and stood up. Mia, who was grabbing her forehead in pain as the jar had broken the skin, slowly looked up with teary, large brown eyes when she heard Mr. Ice Cube was here. She was slightly shivering from the cold drink poured on her body and how soaking wet she was under the cafeteria air conditioner. She hugged her midriff as usual and glanced at Mr. Ice Cube's imposing back, blocking her from the other students. Even though she couldn't see his face, she could feel the cold aura emitting from him. How did he even get here when she hadn't noticed him in the cafeteria? Chapter 50 Drive Her to Hell. Diane quickly composed herself, wearing back her pitiful expression. "Mr. Bennett, please don't misunderstand the situation. We weren't doing anything wrong to her. We were just trying to make her learn how to be kind to others. She's a girl from the slum, yet when we tried to help her, she pushed Sally away and poured milkshake on her." She tried to explain, her blue eyes wide and innocent, as if she had been misjudged for doing something good. Neil's expression darkened as he heard her words. It took everything in him to remind himself that the person before him was a woman, and he shouldn't resort to violence to shut her up for good. He strongly disliked girls like Diane, and the fact that she was lying to his face when he had witnessed all the nonsense she'd done, did nothing to ease his anger. I see," Neil hummed calmly as he finally glanced at the other girl on the floor, who was still putting on a fake act of an injured person with tears in her eyes. He also noticed the other students in the cafeteria were starting to record what was happening on their cameras and phones. And as he saw them, he couldn't help but think, he must have really done something grave in his past life for his mission to involve a university filled with irresponsible students and upcoming brainless journalists who put on drama to get something to publish. Was this all about having something to publish, or were they just picking on little Mia because she was different from them? Diane continued playing the victim as she noticed the professor was staring at Sally. "Mr. Bennett, please make her apologize to Sally. She's causing trouble for everyone in school. She has always been like this. First, she claimed my hard-earned story as her own and tried to commit suicide when she was accused of plagiarism. and now that her lifestyle is exposed to everyone and we tried to help her, she went crazy. She's a psychopath. The other students gathered around the scene began to support Diane, chiming in with demands for Mia to apologize to Sally. Neil's expression turned blank, revealing no emotions, not even his temper. He turned towards Mia, who was hugging herself. When his eyes fell on her bleeding forehead, his expression took a 360-degree turn. His gray eyes darkened like an upcoming tornado. He clenched his jaw tightly as he noticed how she looked like a lone child amidst the world of bullies. However, Mia, who noticed Mr. Ice Cube's darkened expression, misunderstood, thinking he believed what the other students were saying about her. Of course, he would believe. Especially when it was Diane who was in charge of making the accusation. Ever since Mia had made the mistake of trusting Diane with her story and was betrayed, her life in Ivy Grove had been nothing but a life in hell. Nobody would want to believe or even support her because she was the outcast among them all. She was the poor girl with no influential background. So, who would believe her when she explained how she was being set up by Diane? No one. All the students and professors in school would do anything to get on the foster family's good grace, and even if Diane was in the wrong, they would look for ways to make her appear to be the good guy. That was how much money and power could buy you freedom. However, she had thought Mr. Ice Cube would at least be different from the rest, but the way he was looking at her, she felt her heart sink into her chest. Mia shrank backward as he took a step towards her, and her large brown eyes filled with tears. A huge drop of a tear rolled down her flushed cheeks. Neil's eyes didn't miss the broken expression on her face and how she moved away as if she feared he would force her to make the apologies she so stubbornly refused to give. Without revealing any emotions in his voice, he nodded to the crowd. Mia will apologize, he stated calmly. Diane looked satisfied. She grinned and crossed her arms against her chest to watch how Mia would be dragged down. She had always wanted this, to watch her bully in high school lose face in public. And now she had finally gotten the school Adonis professor to side with her. She had known it from the start that Mr. Bennett wouldn't be able to act indifferent to her charm and influence. She was a foster, the daughter of one of Ivy Grove Institute's governance, and just like how the students would do whatever she wanted just to get on her family's good grace, Mr. Bennett would also do it. He would embarrass Mia and make her leave the school in shame. "Come here, Harrison." Neil beckoned for her to come forward. But Mia shook her head and muttered with tear-filled eyes, "I did not do anything, and I will not apologize." Neil, however, surprised everyone as he moved forward and grabbed Mia's wrist. His grip was tight and strong, yet strangely tender. Mia, thinking he was going to force her to apologize, tried to pull away by wiggling her wrist from his grip, but he wasn't going to budge. To Mia's and everyone's surprise, Neil pulled her towards Diane. He raised her hand and used it to slap Diane across the face, the action swift and resounding, making everyone in the cafeteria gasp. Since he couldn't hit a woman, another woman hitting her gender wasn't a crime. Everyone went still in shock and disbelief. Even Mia couldn't believe what had just happened. She felt her palm burn from the impact of the slap. From how her own palm was burning, she couldn't help but wonder what sort of pain Diane must be experiencing on her cheek. And when she glanced at Diane, she noticed how the girl's face was still turned to the side from the impact of the slap. She didn't move an inch and remained rooted in her position while pressing a hand on her cheek. Neil looked at Diane and warned with a chilling calmness, "If you ever try to make up such nonsense drama again in my presence, I won't hesitate to hit you myself." The cafeteria was left in stunned silence. Neil didn't wait for anyone to speak. He grabbed Mia, who looked too shocked to move, by her wrist. Without hesitation, he pulled her away towards the cafeteria exit. Mia turned back as she was being pulled away by Mr. Ice Cube and glanced at Diane. She noticed the hateful, murderous gaze Diane threw at her, and Mia felt a slight shiver down her spine. As Neil continued to pull her along without a word, Mia blankly stared at his back and his crew-cut hair that looked faded on the sides. He seemed like a macho man walking away after dominating the entire world. His gait was long and steady. She didn't know why he was pulling her along with him, but she silently followed and even tried to match his long strides so he wouldn't be pulling her behind like he was pulling a child. When they walked out of the cafeteria, Mia heard Rain's voice calling out to her from afar, but before she could even turn, Neil pulled her out of the university. The university's hustle faded behind them. He didn't stop and continued towards the parking lot of Ivy Grove. Why was he taking her to the parking lot? Mia thought as she looked back to see if Rain was following them, but her friend was nowhere in sight. She must have lost them around the blocks because Mia had felt her running to catch up. Reaching his sleek black Ferrari, he effortlessly opened the passenger door for Mia. Without giving her any time to question him on where they were going, he gently used his hand to guide her head down, pushing her into the car with a firm slam of the door. Walking around the car, Neil swiftly took the driver's seat, secured his seatbelt, and started the powerful engine. The black Ferrari roared to life, echoing through the silent parking lot. Neil drove the sleek vehicle out of the garage and onto the quiet campus roads. As they left, Mia, now seated beside Mr. Ice Cube, curled up to the side and hugged her body, as her wet clothes and the car's air conditioner were making her feel cold. Her forehead was still burning, and with how the man beside her was speeding like the hounds of hell were chasing him, Mia felt the urge to throw up. But then, as if noticing her discomfort, he slowed down and even turned off the car's air conditioner, turning up the warmer instead. Now that he had finally slowed down, Mia tried to make sense of the abrupt turn of events. She hadn't dared to ever hit Diane because she knew the consequences of doing so. Diane would make her lose her scholarship and her dreams of graduating from Ivy Grove would come crumbling down, but now that Mr. Ice Cube had made her do it, she feared that today might probably be her last day in Ivy Grove Institution. She would disappoint her poor mother who had even collected a huge sum of loan to cover her school material expenses. Mia fought back the tears of shame that threatened to escape her eyes. She should have just apologized and gotten it over with in the cafeteria, but her pride would now cause her to lose her scholarship. As Mia thought about the disappointment she would cause her mother if she lost her scholarship, she turned away and looked out through the car's window. She didn't care where he was taking her, as long as she wouldn't be going back to the school anytime soon to get the news that she had lost her scholarship. He could drive her to hell for all she cared.